Good afternoon, everyone who's joined. We will be starting in 3 minutes. While we are waiting for people to join, we have a very short quiz on the importance of change management. So if you could just tell us your opinion and experience on change management, this will just give us an opportunity to uh, gauge the, your past experience on how change management has been for you as a part of your project experience. Please select one of the options. It's just one question. We're just trying to understand how you gauge the importance of change management. Those of you who have just joined, this is just one single question. We're just trying to understand your experience about the importance of change management in your respective projects. It's just one question. Select one of the options. What do you think is the impact of change management on a project? We will be starting in 1 minute, and just before that, we'd just like to get your opinion on the importance of change management and the impact of change management on your project. Thank you. I will close the poll now because we would like to get started on the session and share you the. So as you can see, a majority, 90% of you have voted, and all have voted either as it being extremely important or very important. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. My name is Kumar. I'll be your moderator today. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the second knowledge series session of Ryan Ruke Academy. We did the first one on the overall concepts of project management, and this session is specific to change management. It gives me great pleasure to hand this over to Shri, who has had vast experience in implementing extremely complex multinational projects all over the world. Big thank you for everybody joining us today. And Shri, over to you. Enjoy the session, everyone. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kumar, and thank you to everybody on the call who's joined us today. And good morning, good afternoon. I know a couple of us are from different continents today on this webinar. I certainly hope you would find the time useful. Now, good start for the discussions today from the poll with an acknowledgement on the importance of change management. What I wanted to go through today is to kind of take it into 4 different sections. Number 1, look at, understand, of course, you said that in your poll as well, and to reinforce why is it important, and also try to take a negative connotation as to what can really go wrong and why is it necessary to manage change. Number 1. With that acknowledgement, I'll try to move into what should be an effective approach to managing change in your projects. We will step into thereafter into a method and process. What is the process that you should have in order to be able to do so? And finally, try to arrive at an integrated approach. How do you induct the theory into a real execution model for your projects? So that's how I'll try to approach our topic today. Let's look at the beginning. What is change management? What is the cause for it? Why does it become necessary? I mean, it's obvious because change management relates to people, and most of the time we make these assumptions about human behavior. Number one is the most obvious. We have been working on this project. We have been wanting to get this going. Everybody's been talking about it. So we make this assumption that the team is extremely objective and task driven. Everybody would be rational. Human factors, fear of being left out, anxiety, etc., don't really impact the project. Now, on that basis, you also start to believe that it is obvious. Everybody knows what we are doing and why we are doing, and everybody's well prepared. We've been talking about it for several months. And also to say, change management is just common sense. It's about changing environments. You shift your house, you shift your job, right? You meet up with new people. How do you accommodate, adjust to all of this? Change management is just that. It's just left to people, and people will just come around it and get over it. We also assume that you have a team, everybody will give it their best. Last but not the least, you assume that people have been on their job several years, several decades. They know their jobs really well. And when it comes to an implementation, such as the profession that we are in, all that you must do is train them adequately, and there they go, and you would have a successful project. The real impact of change management is this. The effect of this, I tried to show this like trying to plot it into a chart, let's say. If you try to plot the achievement of objectives in a project over a period of time, there is an expectation from stakeholders, the project sponsors, the people who are going to use the system, the real beneficiaries of your implementation. So let's say this is their expectation curve over a period of time. What ends up happening is their experience doesn't match their expectation. You will see that plotted on a blue curve. And if you plot this over the life cycle of an implementation, let's say you start at the prepare phase, you're preparing for the project, everybody's on the same page, hopefully. Start to get to around planning, there is a widening gap, it fluctuates and so on. You get into validation of the system, there is a bigger gap about it. And then this particular graph, I've kind of shown you an optimistic view, where towards the end, somehow, the experience curve overtakes the expectation curve, which means despite a prolonged delay, the project seems to have made what was expected. But in several cases, this doesn't happen, right? This is this is a most likely event, but there are several projects where this doesn't happen. It takes the result, it takes the reverse, where there is always a continual gap between the expectation versus experience. And that gap leads to sometimes project failures or significant erosion of time. Now, what kind of an erosion would this cause? When you're not able to bridge the gap between expectation and versus experience, it will lead to a low adoption or a prolonged adoption of the system. So, which means you're talking, let's say, 6 months, you end up with 9 months, 12 months, maybe more, right? You end up with various false positives during the project, thinking everything is good, but to realize subsequently it's not been so, because now we are facing a lot of turbulence. What this results in is a phenomenal wastage of resources and delays. In this journey, you also see resistance. Sometimes in a very adverse situations, you will also see attempts to sabotage. You will see reluctance of members to participate, indifference sometimes, or in a majority of the cases, just following the crowd without real enthusiasm on the success. When you face this, you're in a situation where your implementation is quite chaotic and it's turbulent. When it's turbulent, it's extremely noisy, a lot of tempers, and not a very pleasant situation when you're trying to switch over. The consequence of all this could mean business disruption, or on a far more severe effect, could mean potential loss of business as well. So all this could be consequences of human factor or change not being considered at its true merit. So what is change management there? So it is nothing but a systematic, structured approach to manage the transition. And while you do that transition, the idea is to ensure that any disruption is mitigated as much as it could be. It is also to ensure that the changes that you're trying to bring as part of this project are being done effectively. And lastly, the most important, of course, it is to address the human factor. It is to help adapt or manage the human elements so that those people are able to adapt to these changes quite effectively. So that is what is change management about. With an acknowledgement of what could go wrong, the consequences of that being not managed correctly, let's look at what could be the approach to managing change. What must be considered when you manage change? A couple of fundamentals. You must have a methodology. You must have the right platforms. You don't want to be inventing the wheel. You must have the tools and the templates. You must scale up for complexity and diversity. And in the end, you must adapt it to your organization. And you must adapt it to the objectives of the endeavor. So there is a necessity that there is clarity of those objectives that we're trying to achieve. In several cases, it just ends up that, yeah, we're trying to implement a project. But the real thing is we are trying to achieve the objectives as behind why this project is being implemented. That clarity and that reinforcement becomes necessary. So let's take a systematic view about what is it that you must have for you to be able to manage change. Let's take the first one, which is an implementation methodology. If you're in a project, it is imperative that you must have a clear methodology. It is expected that your methodology will control all the other necessities of the project in terms of managing scope, managing budgets, managing schedule, and so on and so on. So if you don't have that, if you try to embark on something like change management without a clear methodology, it's likely to be far more difficult for you, number one. In this particular illustration, what we're trying to show is scale methodology that we propagate. But the same concept applies to whatever methodology you might be using. As long as it does the fundamentals in terms of preparing you for a project, in terms of schedule, budget, scope, and so on and so on. So the first thing that you must have in order to be able to do so is to ensure that you have a clear methodology. And of course, the elements of change management must be embedded in that particular methodology that we will talk about today. The other thing that we must have, although it is not a necessity like an implementation framework, is you should have the right platforms to facilitate change. It is recommended. Number one, best if you have a best practice process model because it helps in alignment. It helps in alignment on the to-be processes. Second, it is going to be very efficient if you have a proper professional services automation platform because it will help you collaborate. Third, better to adapt a learning management system platform because it will help you train. The last one is to ensure that you have a customer support desk or a principles of it because it will help you transition. Now, these four together play a crucial part in change management, which is alignment or communicating, getting onto the same page, collaborating, training, and transition. So these platforms help you achieve those with a significantly lesser effort. So the next is your tools and templates. What you don't want to be doing is when you're starting off a project, trying to invent a lot of these tools and techniques and trying to figure out how to do this. You're going to end up with a lot of project delay. The first tool and template I want to introduce to you is the project chart. Very often ignored or just considered as a formality that somebody needs to fill up. Of course, we know what the goal is. Of course, we know why we're doing the project, why even do this at all. And most of the time, project managers also tend to approach this as a formality. So when you do that, of course, you are not serious about it as a project manager. So obviously, the audience also doesn't engage in a project chart. So you end up with a bad start from a change management already. So the first thing you do is take your project charter seriously. And there are 4 components in your charter that help you drive change management. Number 1, benefit statement. 2, a clear statement of objectives. 3 is the people who are involved in the change directly. 4, people who are involved in the change, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. A very important component here is your so-called people who are not directly involved but have a huge influence in the project. This is what I typically call as a shadow organization. Although they're not in the formal structure, they yield a lot of positive or negative influence or power on the people who are actually in the project. They must get considered. So your starting point to articulate this is your project chart. That's your first tool or template that you must have. The next is your project management plan. Again, often several times overlooked by project managers as being another formality and so on, but it will be a huge mistake to be able to do so because it doesn't take much time to do it. But what it will help you do from a change management perspective is to address 3 important areas from change management. Number 1 is the resources. Next is most importantly is your training plan. When do you do training, at what frequency and how? Next is your status reporting. When do you communicate, at what frequency and to whom and to how? Having a template to be able to write this up, get concurrence, get acceptance, having it as a SMART goal will go phenomenally in managing change. This is the other tool that you must have with you so that you're not inventing this. The next one is training. You don't want to be inventing how you're going to be approaching training on the project. Your methodology should be stating it. If not, you must plan for it earlier. Typically, training 3 steps. One is ensure that you have the training infrastructure. Ideally, you have an LMS kind of a based approach. Second one, you already have a structure and an approach in terms of authoring training content. Third one, now that you have authored the content, you want to test, you want to train your people on how to use this training content. You should somehow link them to be able to test these things on what you train them on. These 3 tools and the ideas and the templates must be ready beforehand. It will lead you to better change management. Next is in terms of communications. Have your templates ready, structured, ready, and accurate. Your frequent status reports, your steering committee reports, your change network communications, and your specialized communications with project management. Have these tools and techniques ready as well so that you're not inventing this. You don't want to be inventing this at that time with a lot of complexity already on your head when you're managing this project. Ensure your methodology supports them. You have these things already well articulated. Tools templates considered. The next thing is to be able to scale your change management approach. Of course, as the name goes, we use scale methodology. The idea of essence behind scale methodology is to be able to scale. Because in a project, you could be looking at geographic diversity, like in the picture, you have got a multi-continent implementation, multi-country maybe, multiple time zones, multiple languages, cultures, and so on and so on. If you're executing a project of that size, your change management must obviously scale to that complexity. Complexity of languages, time zones, cultures, etc., etc. You could also be the other way, right? Maybe not geographically diverse or culturally diverse, but very diverse from a business perspective. You could have an implementation that's spreading across multiple businesses, very diverse. Therefore, the need to manage change, the exert of influence each business has on the whole, and how the impact must also get considered. The third one is user complexity. Where are they based? Are they computer literate? Are they remote workers? How many of them are blue collar? How many of them are white collars? Do they have similar implementation experience before? How many of them are they? How are they spread out, and so on? So all three must get considered in your scaling up of your change management. What we recommend is that you have a standard methodology for a diverse business, for a large business, where you're able to scale up. We recommend also fast-track implementations or rapid implementations for smaller organizations. But irrespective of how you scale up or scale down, based on the size, change management is still a necessity. Just because you're a small business does not mean change management is not. Either way, it will have a huge impact in managing your success. So that said, that being the foundation and the principle, let's look at how can we induct that into a process. How do you adopt change management very efficiently into how to execute a project? The method and the process to be able to do so has one purpose, which is simplicity. Change must be simple to manage. You don't want to manage change like a project that's bigger than the project itself. Then you're already bound to fail because it's going to cause a huge diversion. Because all said and done, your process of managing a change is a subset of the larger project in any case. You have so many other things to worry about. So the trick about being able to manage change, to be able to get out of this theory of OCM and so on, to be able to really use it, is simplification. Simplification means that it should be effective, it should be very efficient, and it should be well integrated. So that is, we will look at that particular process in terms of how can you manage this, how can you remove this gobbledygook around OCM and try to make it as part of a project. Simplification means essentially three things. So change management is essentially only three things, although it might mean a lot more complex. It just means that you're communicating well, communicating efficiently and effectively. It means you're training well, you're training efficiently and training effectively. Third, as an output of these two, you're all the time checking the readiness of people to adapt to this change. If people are not ready, there's no point going forward. So how do you have a systematic method of assessing? So it's just these three things: communicate, train, and assess. You manage these three, you have actually managed change. So it is as simple. So it doesn't have to, OCM doesn't have to be anything majorly complex. So let's take this particular project execution methodology. It has a lot of change management deliverables and so on. So, but when you put it in the context of simplicity, what does it actually mean? It actually means communication, and all of that broken down into three different segments. You start with creating awareness. So your communications in the beginning is all about creating awareness in terms of what we are trying to do to an extended audience. Somewhere halfway through the project, you're actually reinforcing or trying to measure that everybody's understanding what is happening in the project. As you move further down, you're shifting from understanding to commitment. Your goal is to be able to obtain commitment. So communications is all structured about evolving from creating awareness to ensuring understanding to obtaining commitment. Your readiness assessments as well exactly follow the same structure. When you create awareness, you check if people are aware of what is happening. At the end of design phase, for example, you're running a proof of concept, you check whether people really understood what is going on. You remember I talked about false positives very early as part of this. It's because when you have an assessment, you are eliminating false positives. So if people aren't understanding what is being presented to them on proof of concept, you have a problem then and there. There's no point in going forward. You have assessments to ensure that understanding is there. As you finally progress towards the more intense phases of the project around go lives, assessment shifts towards obtaining commitment, and it's supported by the communications. So you ensure that people are committed to make this project live. Finally, you ensure that towards transition, you have the support model in place. You assess that as well. So it's simple, ensuring awareness, ensuring understanding, ensuring commitment. And to be able to do so, you need the last bucket, which is training. Understand what the training needs are, review the training content, see if the procedures are relevant. After the training, simply assess if the training was good enough and the training was good enough, and adjust and correct accordingly. So this is how you simplify change management into these three rudimentary actions. Let's see how it really looks in a particular project, right? If you're going to this particular project, the typical phases from a preparation to a plan to a design and to organize, you can integrate change management into 10 deliverables, let's say. And you can split these deliverables across the phases. First phase, let's say, while you're planning the project, preparing and planning, 3 deliverables of change management. Number 1, identify a change network, which is the shadow organization, so to speak, and the formal organization. People are impacted directly, people are impacted indirectly. Identify them, establish a training management plan, establish a communication plan. 3 deliverables at the start. As you step into design, you're wrapping up your system, ensure that you are preparing for training. Communicate to people that, look guys, we are hitting end of design. We want to keep you all informed that the system seems to be designed already. We have a few steps that we're going to come to you as the business. So start to communicate that. As you're in the validate phase, ensure that people are ready to train, people are ready to get trained. Because once you complete that, you're going to go into a go live mode. So communicate again in terms of the status of the validation, how successful it has been, the problems that you've been facing, what is coming up next, and so on. Communicate the status so that people are prepared for what is coming next. Lastly, as you head into go live, end user training evaluation, evaluate the training has happened well. I spoke about adoption very early, and this is where the answer comes in. You have heat maps. Heat maps tell you a gauge. What is the volume intake in your new system post implementation versus how it was there before? The heat maps gives you a gauge. So it will help you control falling adoption rates. So because sometimes you could be thinking that the product has gone great and everybody is live, but only to realize later that people have hardly been using it or they've been using it wrongly. So your hypercare just gets prolonged quite a bit. So heat maps will help you control that. Lastly, as you start to taper off the project, do a lessons learned as part of your change management. Look at what has gone well so that you're able to repeat that and improvise. Very important to do so. Most of the time when you look at lessons learned, people just talk about what did not go well. And people look at it all the time towards the end of the project. But what is important is, as part of lessons learned, as part of your change management, you also look at what really went well, because you got to look at what you want to reinforce and what you want to avoid. So do both. So these are your deliverables from a change management perspective. Let us put this all into a process. So if you go to a project lifecycle, how do you manage this as a project? To summarize this, start of the project, document all your change management needs. When you're planning for it, induct your change management needs into your project management plan. As you build your system, as you design it, you got to ensure that people understand what you have designed, which is your goal now here is to reduce your false positives. Several cases it happens, and many of you are professionals in this job. You would have seen it when you run through a proof of concept. There is a lot of indifference. People are simply nodding their heads, not understanding, but you still are able to sign off proof of concept because they're not taking a project very seriously. Yeah, we'll look at it when we go live. So that is what you want to avoid. That leads to a false positive, that leads to an expectation gap. So establish that acceptance criteria that your system design has been adequate. So when you're validating your system, you're going to start with your key user training. So at that time, assess the effectiveness of the key user training. So if it has not been effective, the guy didn't understand what you have been teaching them, there are no position to evaluate your system. The entire subsequent steps are just going to be a waste of time and budget, and it's going to lead to a delay. Sorry. So once you've gotten over that, when you're trying to validate your system, again repeat the same thing. Establish acceptance criteria. If they're going to test the system, agree on what makes the test successful or failure. Finally, agree on a stage gate that all the testing has happened so that you're removing false positives as you get on to your most crucial phase, which is your go live. Because this is where you could end up with business disruption. So far, it's a wastage of resources. Now we are talking about business disruption. So have a stage gate. Just before go live, ensure training to end users has been very effective. End users understand their jobs. I was talking about in the early stages of this presentation, one of the things that we assume is people know their jobs, not necessarily. So what you ought to do is end user training, ensure that people have understood. Have a clear decision criteria for go live and have a hypercare. So this is how your process view is. What do you do when at your multiple stages of the project as part of change management? Let's do a recap, simple do's and don'ts as project managers, what you should be doing for change. First, capture the change network in your project charter. Regular and consistent communication is a must in a project. Document protocols, very necessary, and agree on success criteria or key milestones on the project. Do not go forward till you have agreed on a success criteria, and do not go forward as well until your success criteria has been met. Most often, we ignore the rest. So we move forward in the interest of showing progress, in the interest of visual thinking. So that is what is your first point in the don'ts. Don't ignore stage sign-off. We often have this temptation, oh, asking for a stage sign-off is negative. It will have a negative connotation. It will lead to negative behavior, right? But no, asking for a stage sign-off is simply asking for acceptance of what has been done. Keep your communication reliable. Do not ignore the importance of criteria for key milestones. Lastly, most importantly, do not ignore ineffective training or the damage of ineffective trainers as well. Many of the times you go with the trainer, the trainer concept, realizing that these people whom you're appointing as trainers may not be good trainers at all. They're probably just simply good at their jobs. So manage their effectiveness of it. Teach them how to train and then manage that training. So these are the do's and don'ts for you to be able to manage change well. If you do this, you've got your process and the method as well in place. So what you have now is the last part. How do you get this all practical, all inducted into an implementation mode? Let's look at the final. So how do you do it right? Very simply put, it's just three things: structured and consistent communication, structured and effective training management, and assessment of completion using stage gates. If you're able to do these three, you have accomplished change management. Let's take communication as a process. So what do you expect to do in communication? It's not a big deal, it's just part of your methodology if you put it up. So understand your methodology, understand your reporting standards. Review your formats and frequency as part of your tools and templates, which I told you earlier when we started this. Look at the structure of the weekly reports, change network reports, and steering committee reports. Do the obvious, which is identifying the stakeholders, who are the members and the audience of each of these communications. Ensure that communications is prompt and all the time consistent. If you don't do this, you will see a lot of turbulence. You are actually fueling all those people who want to be against this project, but all you must do is communicate. And agree on acceptance criteria at every stage gate, communicate the progress of that. So the simple 101s of communication. If you're able to induct this, you have addressed one pillar of change management. Let's look at the other one, which is training. Obviously, it is recommended, as I said earlier, that in today's world and technology, where everybody is learning to work remotely and so on, adapt an LMS approach. Because it gives you the ultimate choice. It helps you scale. You can do training self-paced, you can do instructor-paced, or you can do both. And you also give the option for users who are not being trained enough to reinforce themselves without an incremental cost. Of course, it's going to drive your costs significantly lower if you have an LMS platform. Try to order things as much as in simulation content. Do not publish books for people to read. Lastly, intertwine your training content with your process. Several projects do this mistake. When they're talking about training content, you're talking about you're talking about system manuals and say, yeah, this is the training. It could be a mistake to do so because you end up teaching people on how to use the system and not to how to adapt to processes. When this happens, we have seen typically prolonged go lives because they're struggling to relate to business. They know how to probably use it at best. So always structure your content on the scenarios. Very practical advice. Many training content do this mistake. Don't jumble up processes and multiple roles into your training content. All the time, try to order the content based on the roles. That should, sorry, that should be a lowest denominator on your project. Last, training is only good based on how good the evaluation is. So evaluate the training. Very, very important. If the training, if people say the training isn't good, investigate root cause, reinforce. It is going to give you tremendous change management benefits if you're able to reinforce training. Also communicate the effectiveness in your stage gates. It will help you manage change. It will help you manage resistance. That takes you to the third side of how do you make it all this practical, right? I mean, before that, on the training side of it, there's one thing I skipped is many projects do this mistake is as part of your validation, you provide as part of training content and collateral job helps. Provide job helps that are actually step by step in terms of how to execute. But do not do this costly mistake of not trying to tie training content and jobs helps into test sheets. Because most often you do trainings that are not process oriented, that are more functional oriented. So people get trained, but they're not well positioned to test the system because they don't know the scenarios. They can't adapt the system to the scenarios for them to be able to test. So all the time, try to tie your training to your test sheets. Provide test sheets in this particular example. The test sheets come with the same process. They're elaborated with visuals. They give you step by step. where you must go to the system and do what. They give you provisions for what is the input of data, what's the output of data. Also provisions to say this particular step passed or it failed. That way, you are able to assess that, put them all together for your assessment, whether the testing was successful, user acceptance testing was successful or not. So it will also, not only training also helps you get your people up and running, measurement of the effectiveness of training also helps you assess, which is a key pillar of change management. So let's look at the final element of change management. How do you ensure readiness? I mean, the analogy that I have, although it can be sound a little silly, is when you're going through school, right? You're going to grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, but you don't have an examination at any point of time. You gradually land up in grade 10. But neither have you studied nor have you taken it seriously. But now you're in grade 10, you've got a huge obstacle. No way in hell you're going to clear the exam because you never evaluated yourself. Same analogy in a project. You're going through a prepare phase, you're going through a plan phase, you're designing in. Don't skip things. Always measure that at each session or each major stage gate, you have achieved everything that you wanted to achieve. Ensure that all those deliverables were acknowledged. Key sessions such as the proof of concepts, user acceptance tests, trainings, obtain an acceptance that the training was efficient, effective. UAT did serve its purpose, proof of concept served the purpose. Then finally, the big decision is around go live. Have a clear criteria or a checklist that if these processes get ticked off, you're ready for go live. If they don't, you're not ready for go live. So have the clear objective decision making involved. It will help you manage change. It will help you manage that success. So of course, a project is around risk management. At all points of time, you must manage this risk, whether if it's not aligned. So these three together help you integrate the process in terms of how do you make it into Boston. Essentially communicate, train, assess. If you're able to do these three systematically as part of your project management steps, you would have managed change as well very, very efficiently. Let's summarize that. What does this mean? How, when you put all of that together, what are the KPIs for change management? Number one, sign off each stage gate. Number two, documented training, success criteria for milestones and acknowledgement of it. Three, have a continuous risk management approach and mitigating actions. Ensure that readiness assessment is done end of each key milestone. Most important, training effectiveness. Measure the effectiveness of training. If you're able to do these five, you have most likely successfully managed change. You're likely to have overcome the challenges that we spoke earlier when we started this off in terms of the gap between the expectation curve and the analysis and the experience curve. You would have gotten all that. And this is how I wanted to summarize how do you integrate change management into a regular course of your project. I hope a lot of you being on this particular field found that useful, that you're able to take back to your projects and to be able to enact that. And I certainly hope the time has been worth it.
Yep. Thank you, Sri. It was extremely useful and quite detailed. I think the structure and how change management needs to be done from a practical perspective is what would be the key takeaway for me, at least, for sure. We have a whole bunch of questions, but before I get into the questions, I just wanted to quickly mention all of you who have attended this session today. We are very happy to announce that you can enroll yourself into Reinrucke Academy for the Scale Project Management Foundation session, and it's going to be completely free. It's a certification course, so you can publish your certificates in LinkedIn or Facebook or any social media, and it will give you complete overview of project management, not just change management, but other subjects as well. Having said that, let me jump to the questions. We have quite a few questions and we have only a few minutes left. Shri, the first question is from George. What are the critical elements of change management that need to be considered before going live? Quite interesting. This is a perennial challenge. Have we managed everything before we are pushing the product live? Over to you, Sri.
A very excellent question, and of course, and that's the most crucial phase when a project needs to be managed. Let me see, I hope I have a visual as well that I can bring up. I didn't anticipate this question coming up, and let me see, I can bring up a visual to be able to answer this better, right? Yep, I think I have it. Let's talk about this. So how do you manage change at go live, right? There are, in my view, there are four components that you assess from managing that change, because at that time, it's the most practical example of change, because you are switching that business into a new system. You are switching all the users as well into a new system. Four components that we recommend to be considered. Number one is more on the business side of it. That's the approved cutover plan, right? It's more planning. Have a clear cutover plan. Everybody understands, right? The importance of here from a change management perspective is communications. Ensuring that cutover plans have been understood and people are committed to a cutover plan, and your ability to assess their commitment and their ability to deliver to the cutover plan is key. Practical examples, I'll tell you, people end up with a cutover plan, then we will switch over to the new system, data will get migrated in the next 5 days or 4 days, but no, the data migration is going on 10 days, 12 days, and so on and so on. So your project has already gone south, because now you're in a dilemma whether you must bring back your old system or whether you must continue. If you continue, you've got more days without systems, and so on and so on. So you're looking at a real example of business disruption or potential losses. So the first thing is have an approved cutover plan. Ensure that it is communicated well, understood well, accepted well. One step before that, ensure that there is a clear, explicit acceptance of the validation stage. That is, the business acknowledges explicitly and clearly that the system has been validated. Next, end user training, because you're going to push all the users in a live environment. How many times have you gone to a retail experience? You go to a place where you want to buy something, right? You're looking at the data entry operators struggle to operate the system, and they're losing customers because users are not being trained well. So ensure that end user training has really happened well, and it is accepted by them, that they understand. Finally, a larger step that we optionally recommend is to also have an end-to-end workshop where you select a few key users, ask them to come together as the fourth step that you see on the screen, ask them to do a small demonstration to their core group. Help validate that as a group that they're able to team play, they're able to exchange data, information, and processes with them, and they're able to manage the business forming a small team. That's the ultimate assessment, because it tells you their intent that they have understood, they have been trained, and they are committed to seeing a transaction through. So these are four steps that I recommend in terms of how do you manage change at go live. Hopefully it answers the question from George, I think. Yeah. Hello?
Next question is from Mohammed. Uh, and I think this is a doubt I am sure many people will be having during the session. The biggest resistance comes from within the organization to any change. So how do you handle obstacles to organization change management while deploying an ERP system? I know it's quite a broad question, but I'm also sure that a lot of people want to ask this. So over to you, Sri.
Correct. I mean, it's a good one, because the important answer here, I think, is to demystify organizational change management. Often, OCM is considered to be a huge subject, and there is a general myth that it is only the wherewithal of mega corporations. You need OCM in only in mega projects, but not in small projects. No, that's actually a misconception. So, how do you get over obstacles? Is breaking it down and making it simple. Organizational change management means, in when you break it down to grasp, there are only three things: communicate better, communicate to all, communicate effectively. Number one, train better, train effectively, and measure effectiveness. That's number two, which is of training. So communication and training. Third one, at each stage of the project, ensure that the business is always progressing, is actually ready. If you do these three, you will realize that these three apply irrespective of the size. Whether you're doing a multi-continental implementation and or whether you're doing it in a small project, it will still be the same. So this is how you manage the obstacles, simplifying it. Three steps: communicate, train, and assess.
Yep. Absolutely. I've had many instances of large projects and small projects where they did the first two and then they didn't assess, and then eventually they found that many people actually did not get what they wanted from the training, and they are struggling to use the system, and this becomes a nightmare, and then it just prolongs for months and months. So absolutely spot on. The next question is from Dustin. How do we determine the need for a full-time change manager in a project? I know this is quite a subjective question because a lot of it also depends on how much budget the project has, but it is nevertheless still a very valid question. So, Shri, your thoughts on this?
Absolutely right. It's. I think Dustin, very intelligent, very good question there, because this is the usual dilemma that people have when you're planning for projects and when you want to build up your budgets and you don't know what to do. I mean, I'll answer it this way. I think I talked about it earlier. We talked about scalability or scaling up in terms of scaling up to complexity. So if you're looking at multi-continental implementations, of course, you need larger, probably dedicated change managers. However, right, what I would say is you got to look at change management as a subset of project management in a project. That's how you look at it. Anyway, as project managers, you're expected to communicate, you're expected to train, and you're expected to assess. Now, the amount of dedicated effort it takes based on scale and size. So I would look at whether you need a full person or not. You would look at it based on how engaged or how loaded your project manager is. If your project manager is already too loaded to be able to effectively dig into these areas of training, communicating, and assessing readiness, then you probably need a change manager. If that bandwidth is sufficient, you probably don't need one. So in any case, so you must look at it as an integral part of project management and then assess it. And then you will see the incremental returns of the investment that you would make upfront.
Okay. Shri, we have only 5 more minutes and we have actually 5 more questions. So maybe I'll just quickly skim through because they all look very interesting. The next question is from Ali. How do you measure the success of change management? I think you actually spoke about this, but since this is pretty important, it will be good to actually refresh this one.
It's a very
Right in the beginning, and I think a few people might have missed it when they joined a little later. Very important
amazing,
point.
very important point, right? I want to take you back to one of the slides that I had on the earlier sides of this webinar. So I want to measure change management. This is the best way I think to measure effectiveness of change management is in this picture, the graph that you see there, right?
Yeah.
So the red line indicates an expectation from stakeholders. You're expected to go through a project in its life cycle, and this is what is expected to deliver. A good scope, good plan, designed well, validated well, delivers business benefits and done. But what happens is something else. That's your experience curve. Now, how do you measure whether change management has been effective? Your measurement is the reduction of gaps that you see in this particular picture. The lesser and lesser the gaps that you see, your change management is effective. So which means, because I said change management is an integral part of your project implementation. So if your implementation is on schedule, on budget, on delivering the business benefits, you're very likely that you have managed that particular change. So to put it very, very objectively, the gap between expectation to actual at each stage gate is a measure of your effectiveness or otherwise of change management. So it would be great to plot this over a project life cycle to be able to assess the effectiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a simple planned versus actual effort itself will tell a lot of important stories to the project
Absolutely.
manager.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's spot on, Sri. That's very nice. Uh, what are the different types of training we should provide for change management? Again, I think you did mention it somewhere along the line. This is from Shirin.
Good, Sharon. Luckily, I seem to have some visuals for this as well, right? In terms of this, let me beam this up, right? Because when you're talking about training, training is key to change management. You do it at three levels. As part of change, as part of increasing adoption, you try to bring in change management to some of your IT and business analyst people that you do it pretty early, technical training, because you want them to take responsibility. The second one you do is key user training. That is something that you do very, very process centric to help people adapt or validate your new system. The third one is end user training. That's more when you go live. This is very, very role specific. You train only what is needed for that particular role. So that is how you encompass the entire audience, moving between analysts to key users to end users. So these are the different, this is the broader spectrum.
Perfect. Yeah. Uh, then what are the different kinds of communication? This is from Tony, and again, I think a very relevant question. You have spoken about this. Maybe a very quick recap of different kinds of communication that we need through the life cycle of project. I think there was a slide on this as well. So yeah,
Correct. I picked up that particular slide as well. I mean,
yeah.
yes, communication, essentially, you're trying to cover your entire organization. Number one is you look at regular status report. Here, the focus is on schedule, focus is on visibility, what's happening next, decisions that the project team needs to make. The next one is addressed at the decision-making group. It's called as a steering committee group. Focus is on risks and KPIs and decisions, not and maybe an overall schedule, and not the details though. A third one is more a broader communication that is change network. Now, these are the people who influence the project directly or indirectly. So you take a broader overview, you look at the achievement summary, you provide a status update, you provide a visibility to upcoming things. Lastly is more project managers themselves. They're looking at more project status reporting and budgets and OCM tasks and that kind of thing. So overall, this is how you cover the spectrum from a change management perspective.
Perfect. This is absolutely clear. And there's one last question. I think this is probably to all of us. This is from Pratik. How can we register for the free project management course? So Pratik, we will anyway send you an email. Otherwise, you can write to education@ryancs.com as well. And we can set you up for our learning management system for the project management foundation training scale methodology. We will shortly, in any case, also send out an email on how to get about registering yourself for it. Everybody else who've been listening on today, a big thank you for participating yet again. I think quite a few people have joined for the second time on this series on Ryan Bruke Academy's project management knowledge sharing. Shri, a very, very big thank you to you. Once again, a fantastic session, lots of interesting details, and all these details and a lot more are available in the certification course. Shri, a big thank you.
Thank you all for taking the time today, and very nice to talk to all of you. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you, everyone, and good day to you.
Bye.
Bye.